In front of me here is a keyboard that's known as the Voyager by a company called ZSA. It is a split ergonomic keyboard with a lot of stuff to like. It is one of my daily drivers. When I plug it in, you can see that it just lights up. But what I kind of want to do, just to sort of explain the feeling that the keyboard gives me, is just highlight a few of the little things that this keyboard does really, really well, and then also move on to some of the bigger stuff, because I do think this keyboard has some things that I think are very likable. So, first off, this is a keyboard that is symmetric, so I have two halves that are the same size, and you can also see that it has kind of an interesting shape. The idea with that shape is that if you held your hand on the keyboard like so, then your thumb typically likes to make not a forward and backward movement, which the rest of your fingers do. No, your thumb likes to sort of move around like this. So this keyboard, because of, that phenomenon, is able to give you two keys that are relatively easy to press. Two keys per thumb is decent, actually. I found that to be more than what you would need. It's very comfortable, so like that's already kind of a nice design decision right there. But one thing that makes this keyboard different from most other mechanical keyboards is the type of switch that they use. The switches that you're looking at here are known as chalk switches. These are switches that have a relatively low profile. They also actuate pretty quick because there's not a lot of travel. But what I found with other keyboards is that getting these chalk switches out is always just kind of a huge pain. But what the people that designed this keyboard did, and if I zoom in like this, I hope you can actually kind of see it. But you can see that there's like a little groove on the side here. The thinking is that this also makes it a whole lot easier to pull out the switch. So just to emphasize, if I wanted to pull a switch here, what I can do is I could take one of these grooves, put my key puller in those grooves, and then suddenly it is very easy to just grab the chalk switch, which isn't necessarily something that every keyboard does properly. But because replacing the switches on this thing is super duper easy, it was also really easy for me to just try out a whole bunch of stuff. So some of these switches are clicky, some of these switches are more tactile, but the whole thinking is that I can apply a different pressing force for every single switch very easily. And again, it's like a small little detail that they made it super easy for you to exchange as chalk switches. But it is one of those examples where you kind of go, that's actually a very nice attention to detail, and it's a high build quality. That's super nice. And that's kind of the feeling I have with this keyboard. Even though it is pretty minimal, there are lots of these details where you do kind of go take a step back and you just feel like, hey, people care and this is a good design, and it's just a really cool feeling. And I'll give you another example of this. When you buy this keyboard, they give you a box. They also give you a carrying case. More about that in a bit. But they also give you this. And this is kind of like the Hello package that you get, part of the unboxing experience. You can see that they give you a few things. First of all, there's extra switches. So I got mine with very light switches. And basically they give you 4 switches extra, which is, just a super nice touch. If any of the switches break for whatever reason, you can just replace them. Also note the cardboard with the magnets here. Again, kind of a nice touch. But when you look into that, then you see that they actually give you a whole bunch of extra keycaps. And those keycaps also allow me to play around a bit. Now note, these keycaps all allow lights to shine through, and you've got keycaps for like backspace and alt, and there's also some of these blank keycaps with just circle dots in them. You can place them all around the keyboard, and all that stuff is good. But what I also noticed is that there are these keycaps with an extra nib on them. And I think I can show you, like so. You can see that the home row here, where my hand normally is, you can see that my pinky, as well as my index finger, those both have a keycap with a nib on it. And again, this is the smallest little detail, but I really like the tactile feeling of I have my hand on the keyboard and I should really know where the resting position is. And the fact that both my pinky and my index finger at all times can feel where they ought to be, that also makes it a whole lot nicer for me to just know for sure which key my hand is on. Because this is a different layout. If you're used to like a normal row stagger keyboard, like this Apple keyboard over here, then you can see that the layout is just very different to what we have down below here. Now, the ergonomic thinking here is that this really fits your hand much better. Your hands will move up and down, and your fingers all have different lengths, so that's why there's a bit of a stagger, so to say. But there is a learning curve, and the fact that I just have this one extra keycap where I can be very confident where my pinky is supposed to be, and I can always move it back to the home resting position. It's a little detail, but oh, is it a nice touch? And not every company gives you like this bonus pack, so to say, for the keyboard. But it was totally nice for me to be able to customize this board a bit further. And again, that's a really cool feeling. Thought went into this. Very cool. Now, one extra thing that's also pretty unique about this keyboard is you'll notice that it has a very small form factor, but they also give you this carrying case. So this is definitely a keyboard that's meant to be carried out with you. But also, like a small thing, there are magnets in this thing that you can attach to the keyboard. And they're pretty strong magnets too. Like if I were to put it on here, you can actually hear like a pretty solid click as it snaps into place. And the thinking here is that these magnets, when you put them on the bottom, they can just tilt the keyboard slightly outward. It's not a whole lot of degrees, it's really minor. But it is sort of just enough maybe for people to notice. To me personally, I think I prefer it flat compared to this, because I do notice that my hands are in a bit of an awkward angle. But the thing that's really cool about it, and it's also something you'll notice when you read their docs, is this magnet that's in here. You notice that there's also a screw in the middle. Nothing is stopping you, and you're actually encouraged to maybe pull out this magnet and 3D print something that you would like to have instead to maybe get better tenting. And just to highlight one of these examples, if you go to the ZSA website and you go to the accessories page for the Voyager, then you'll notice that there are these community creations, and you can just see them bragging about what the community made. A lot of these things are things you can 3D print yourself. And again, this invites a whole bunch of experimentation, and again, this is kind of a nice little touch. There's tenting bars, there's some thumbs that you can 3D print, lots of stuff to like. But this is also the stuff I really like to see. And if you go to Reddit, you will also on occasion see what people have done with this keyboard when it comes to like customization and stuff. Speaking of which, there's also an extra thing that you can do with this keyboard. And that is that you can buy this accessory. This is also, again, a really strong magnet. You can see that there's a little square in the keyboard over here. So what you can do with this extra tenting kit is you can really just attach the keyboard. Yeah, typically the wire that you would use for this are things that people in photography would use. So Manfrotto is a brand to look out for. But the thing that's just interesting is you can go ahead and you can connect the keyboard to something static. And if you want to do like proper high degree tenting, like you would have to stand and stuff, and you have to really figure out the angle that works well for you. But you really can do extreme tenting with this thing relatively easy if you buy this extra tenting accessory. You can really go nuts with this. You can buy clamps to get it attached to your desk. I should admit that I've not found the perfect way to do that tenting stuff just yet. I'm looking to get it attached to my chair. Haven't really figured out a nice way to do that. But again, like it's another sign of customizability. It's another sign of like good design, and I can definitely imagine once I get the tenting angle just right. I should mention that getting the tenting just right is a bit awkward because it's a pretty long process to figure out what's the best place for it. But I can imagine it being quite comfortable once you get it right eventually. So at this point, you might be thinking like, okay, that looks good. It's a nice split mechanical keyboard. We can do some typing, and like this keyboard also has pretty good backlight, so like a lot of light shines out of this thing. But really the coolest part of the keyboard isn't necessarily just the keyboard itself. It is actually maybe the software that comes with it. So the company behind this keyboard, ZSA, they've made a bunch of keyboards that have had some pretty good reviews. Out of the keyboards I've tried so far, this is my favorite, I should say. But the company ZSA, if they're like known for anything, it's probably the fact that they've got really good configuration software. So if you want to configure the board, you just go to Chrome and you type in layout.new, and this will link you to Oryx. You can make an account, and then this is what the configuration software looks like. Now, as you can see, the keyboard layout that I've got below here, that's perfectly mimicked to what I've got up here. But I'm just going to give you a impression of something you could go ahead and configure very easily. Let's take this key C over here. Currently, it's set to when I tap it, it just has the key press of C. But very easily, I can say, well, there's extra behavior if I hold the button down, or there's extra behavior if I double tap it. So one thing I could do is say, well, if I want to double tap it, then maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command C. And oh, that was pretty easy to configure. Let's do the same thing with V. Like when I double tap it, it's going to be Command V. There we go. Now, what you can also do, by the way, from here is like change the color if you want. There's other places to do that. But I've just made a change to this layout. So what I could go ahead and do is I can hit this compile this layout button. It's going to do the compiling from web thing. And once it's done with that, all you got to do is hit save to my keyboard. This is going to start a new prompt. From here, what you got to do is you got to press the button that's on the side of the keyboard over here. So you just press that once. You hit connect. At this point, you have to tell the browser that you're giving permission to flash the hardware. So you hit connect again. And at this point in time, the keyboard is going to be just unresponsive because it's reflashing it. And it's going to give you a little signal when it's done. Beep, boop, beep, and we're good. And just to give the quickest demo of this, this is a sentence. All right, that's the sentence. Let's select that. And if I now quickly hit double tap on C, that should now be copied. And if I now double tap on V, there we go. Pretty nice, pretty easy to configure. Note that people often like to call this tap dancing, by the way. So you can tap, you can hold, you can double tap, you can hold and then tap, and there's some of those things that you can just easily configure. But the main power I thought that this really gives you is just each and every key can just do so many things, and it's so easy to configure. Other basic stuff that you can expect is when I hit a button that then there's a layer switch. There's multiple of those. I've got one arrow cluster that also has all of my symbols, and I've got this other cluster over here that can do the mouse movement and also hit buttons, so to say. But the fun doesn't necessarily stop here. What you can also do, just to give another impression of like stuff that you can actually configure, you can go into the advanced settings module. Here what you can do, for example, is you can also define the tapping term. So that's how long do we wait in terms of milliseconds before we distinguish between holding a button down and just tapping it. But there's also an advanced setting with this. So what I can do is I can say, I want per key tapping configured. And what this allows you to do, if you wanted it, is you can say, well, maybe some buttons have a different timing between holding it down and tapping than other buttons. It might be the case that your pinkies aren't super fast, but your other fingers are. So what I could theoretically do is I could set the tapping term here to like 120 instead of 150, let's say. And I can do the same thing on the side over here. And the reason why I think this is so nice is even though this board does, I believe it allows for QMK, which is this thing you can program manually if you really wanted to. But it does feel like I really get just enough power from this configurator that I don't have to learn a new programming language to really fine-tune this board to the stuff that I wanted to do. And to be honest, I haven't even explored everything that you can do here. One thing that's good to know is there's also this feature known as combos. And the thinking here is that you might be able to press two keys at the same time. And when you do that, you can trigger another button press. So the example that they give here is when you hold A and S down together, then maybe that should trigger escape. So again, that's super cool. So another thing I quickly want to show you is that you can also very easily configure this thing that's known as a hyper key. Hyper is Alt, Shift, Command, and Control all pressed at the same time. And your initial thinking might be like, why would you want that? Well, the cool thing here is that if I were now to hold this button down and then press any other key, it's very unlikely that any app will actually have that as an actual keyboard shortcut, which means that if you want to add custom shortcuts to whatever app, Hyper and then whatever 1, 2, or 3 or Q or whatever letter, that's going to be a shortcut that's available to you. And Hyper is one. There's another one over here called Meh, which is basically Alt, Shift, and Control, not using Command, but With those two, I pretty much can make sure that I always have a custom keyboard shortcut that I can add to an app, which is also just kind of nice. Now, in terms of the use of these thumb buttons, I have one thumb that's just going to switch the layer. I have this other thumb that's space, and these two other keys over here are just for very frequently used shortcuts. So I've got one shortcut over here that's allowing me to make a selection of any clickable element on the screen via this app called Home Row. And I have Raycast set to this other button, so I can very easily open apps from here. I could also use keyboard shortcuts for both of them, but they're nice and easily accessible. I think one key per thumb would also be probably good enough for me. But the main thing I want to drive home here is just this configurator software. It's the bee's knees. Like, it's really, really good. And what you can also quite easily do is have a look at what other people have configured. All that stuff is just super nice. So the board is lightweight. You can bring it with you quite easily. It is super duper configurable. And the software is just really, I would argue, almost the gold standard in this space. But all those things combined also really match with just the vibe you get when you go to their website and their marketing pages and all of that. They have a blog that I actually really, really want to read. It's sometimes about new features and stuff. That's the stuff that you would expect. But it's also like little hints and tips about ergonomic topics and cool examples of people customizing the boards. And they really come up with like non-bullshit content you just really, really want to read. I believe like if you go all the way to the bottom, there's an actual quote for their mailing list, which is basically, "Thank you for creating a newsletter that I want to read instead of an auto-delete." That is so the feeling that I've got with all of their messaging, basically. And it also kind of feels nice to be able to invest in a board with a brand that's also just kind of likable. I just really wanted to have mentioned that. Like, check out their blog. There's cool stuff here. So yeah, I am really enjoying this board. I hope that you're going to check out ZSA, if only for the inspiration. Before you go and buy this thing, though, I do think there's just a couple of downsides that are just really fair to mention. One downside is that because this keyboard uses chalk switches, you are going to have less variety available in terms of what switch you pick. Chalk switches have less key travel, and that can be great. But in my experience, they also don't have really good tactile switches yet. This might change, of course, but be aware that in terms of customizing the switches, your options are just a little bit limited. Another downside is that if you live in the Netherlands, like I do, you may have to pay for the import duties. And that can make this board pretty darn expensive. I don't know exactly what I paid, but I believe it was like a good 20% on top of the price of the board. And the board wasn't necessarily cheap either. So that's, be prepared for that little surprise. Some people got lucky, confirmed that on Reddit. But sometimes you also have to pay for these import duties, and that can be a hefty sum to pay. Another thing that I think is also fair to mention is it can take a while to learn this board and this layout. I do think that in the end, ergonomically, this way it makes a whole lot more sense. And in terms of my wrist pain when it does flare up on other keyboards, it is usually the keyboards that have row stagger instead of this column stagger. So that's great, but there is a learning curve. Be prepared to invest like maybe a month or two. Part of me also wonders if this keyboard might have been a bit more comfortable if they used smaller keycaps. One thing that you might be able to notice and see here, if I compare the size of the chalk switch to the size of the keycap, right? Like, you could come up with smaller keycaps, and maybe you would have to move your hands less if you wanted to go in that direction. I imagine they did this because if you have shorter travel, you might have to relearn more, because this is the same size as a normal keyboard keycap. But still, it's a thing that I wonder about. One thing that's also good to keep in the back of your mind is that this keyboard is wired at all times. There's no wireless variant of this. To me, that's actually a positive. I've always had small issues with Bluetooth, and I get that some people like to have a clean desk. I don't mind as much to have wires here, but if that is your thing, if you really want to have wireless, this won't be the board for you. I guess from the ergonomic standpoint, the main thing that I do think I miss, and it's not like the biggest worry, but it is still a miss, is I do think that this would have been just slightly more comfortable if there was like a little palm pad. Like just a little bit of height over here. Maybe I have to go to the mill and make like my own little thing, but I do think having a little bit of a palm pad over here just to make it a little bit taller, right? Like it's really not a thick keyboard, but like that half a centimeter over there, if my hand could just rest on that, that does feel like it might be a bit more comfortable. I do understand that this also makes the tenting harder, so there's a design consideration here. Like, I don't know if you can do easy tenting with a palm pad attached. But I am going to probably end up trying to make my own for this this board. Like, I do think the palm pad would have made it just a bit better for me. But yeah, all in all, nice and lightweight to carry. That's the thing you're going to like most about this ergonomic keyboard. I think the company that made this has made some really cool stuff as far as branding and blog goes. Definitely not cheap. I guess the best advice I do have, actually, if you are interested in this board, do check out eBay and secondhand websites. You can get them for a much better price there. And the value is just going to pretty much remain for a while in these boards. Because, again, it's a good board. I really like using it, even though I do miss the palm pad.